The princess had not spoken in 93 days. Senna knew this because it was written on the intake sheet the chamberlain had handed her that morning, in neat angular script, along with the list of duties she was expected to perform in the inner rooms. Fresh linens by the 7th hour, the window screens cleaned on alternating days, the small sand table raked before the afternoon light came through the eastern arch. At the bottom of the sheet, underlined twice, was a note she had read 3 times on the walk upstairs. Do not press for speech. Do not reward silence with undue attention. Maintain calm and professional conduct at all times. It was the kind of instruction that told you a great deal about every person who had come before you. The inner rooms of the Vethali imperial suite smelled of something like cedar and something like rain, and the light was a soft blue gold that came through crystal panels in the ceiling and shifted slowly across the floor as the day moved. The princess sat in the center of the room in a low chair, her hands folded in her lap, her pale silver eyes watching the middle distance with the specific quality of stillness that Senna had seen once before, in her younger brother after their father died. The stillness of a person who has decided that the world is not entirely safe and has made themselves very small inside it to wait. She was perhaps 8 or 9 years old by Vethali reckoning. Her name was Lysara Veth, and she was the only heir of the Vethali Empire, and 3 months ago, on the morning of the covenant ceremony, she had simply stopped speaking. No wound, no illness. The palace physicians had checked twice, and the senior throat healer from the Vethali Academy of Voice had come all the way from the northern continent and spent 4 hours running diagnostics, and they had found nothing wrong with the physical apparatus of speech. After that, the counselors had come, 6 of them, specialists in childhood grief and developmental silence, and what the Vethali called the still-tongue condition, which had 3 recognized subtypes and a treatment protocol that ran to 40 pages. They had come with tools and gentle voices and careful questions, and Lysara had looked at every one of them with the same silver-eyed steadiness and said nothing, and after a while they had gone. The chamberlain had reassigned 2 servant girls already. One had found the silence too large. The other had tried talking at it constantly, filling the room with cheerful noise in the belief that noise invited response, which was perhaps the most human theory imaginable and also, apparently, incorrect. Senna set down her supply kit beside the door and began with the linens. She was 16, and she had been a palace servant for 8 months, and before that she had worked in her aunt's house in the lower city doing very similar work. And before that she had sat beside her brother for long weeks in the winter when he was small and the world had gone wrong for him. And she had learned then that a room with a grieving person in it was not an empty room. It was a full room, and you moved through it accordingly. She stripped the bed, bundled the old linens, and shook out the new ones with a snap that was precise but not sharp. She worked from the far corners in, the way her aunt had taught her, tuck the near side first, smooth it flat before you commit to it. The princess watched her the way a cat watches something that has not decided whether to be interesting yet. Senna did not look back at her directly. She was aware of the watching the way you are aware of light from a window, present, noted, not requiring a response. She moved to the window screens next. The eastern arch was grimy with the fine particulate dust that the Vethali called breath chalk, which settled out of the palace atmosphere filtration system and coated everything pale and faintly luminous if you let it go. She had a soft cloth for it. She worked in slow strokes from top to bottom, and the cloth came away gray-blue, and the crystal panels underneath began to clarify. From behind her, very quietly, there was a small shifting sound, a chair moving. Senna kept working. She finished the screens, rinsed the cloth in the small basin by the wall, and set it to dry. Then she retrieved her mending kit from the supply bag, because the duty sheet also listed a damaged seam on the cushion cover of the window seat, and she sat down on the floor near the seat to work on it. The princess had moved her chair. Not much, perhaps a quarter of a meter closer to where Senna was working. She had done it without sound, or nearly without sound, and she sat now with the same folded hand stillness as before. Senna threaded her needle. She had spent enough time with her brother to know that you did not remark on small movements. You let them happen and you stayed the same voice, same presence, same degree of not quite looking. What broke the spell was the moment you acknowledged the movement, because acknowledgement told the person that you had been measuring the distance all along, and that you would keep measuring it, and they would feel hunted rather than accompanied. She pulled the seam straight and began to close it in small, even stitches. "The thing about a cushion cover," she said, not quite to the princess and not quite to herself, "is that the seam fails at the corner first. Always. Because the corner carries more tension than the flat sides. People stuff them too full and then sit on them, and the corner gets the worst of it." She held it up and looked at the stitching, set it back down and kept working. "My aunt had a chair with a cushion like this. She used to stuff it with dried grass from the market because proper fill was expensive, and the grass would compact down over winter and she would stuff more in until the cover was straining. I restitched that corner maybe 6 times. A pause. A stitch. She said the chair was the most expensive cheap thing she had ever owned. Nothing from the direction of the moved chair. But when Senna glanced toward the wall, not at the princess, just past her, toward the window, she saw that Lysara's head was turned slightly, the way a person's head turns when they are listening to something while pretending not to. Senna kept her eyes on her work. She finished the seam, knotted it off and trimmed the thread. The next morning she came back for the window screens, and the morning after that she came for the linens again. On the 4th day the chamberlain stopped her in the corridor outside the suite and asked her, in a carefully neutral voice, whether she had noticed any change in the princess's behavior. Senna thought about the chair that had moved, the head that had turned while pretending not to listen. "She's watching," Senna said. The chamberlain made a note on his board. He did not seem to know what to do with the information, which Senna found instructive. It told her that the people making decisions about Lysara were looking for specific kinds of signals and had decided in advance which ones would count. She went in with her cloth and her mending kit. The chair was already closer to the window than it had been the day before. On the 5th day, the door opened behind her while she was working. One of the counselors came in, a tall Vethali woman in formal gray, carrying a soft-sided case that Senna recognized from the previous week's duty notes as containing the sensory mapping tools. She gave Senna a brief professional nod, the kind that meant please continue your work in the background, and crossed to where Lysara sat. "Your Highness." Her voice was gentle and practiced, the warmth in it precisely calibrated, the way warmth is when it has been trained into someone rather than grown. "I wondered if we might try the naming exercise today. Do you remember we lay the tiles on the floor and you point to?" Lysara's eyes went flat. Not hostile, just absent, the way a lamp dims when the source is pulled. She looked past the counselor at the middle distance, and her hands went very still in her lap. The counselor waited. She waited the full 3 minutes the protocol specified. Senna had seen the protocol sheet pinned to the outside of the door, and then she said, softly, "Whenever you're ready," and waited another minute, and then she repacked her case with careful, quiet movements and left. The room was very still after the door shut. Senna put her mending kit away and moved to the sand table, a small square tray of pale gold sand that sat in the corner, and was used, apparently, for some Vethali meditative practice, though no one had explained exactly what practice. She used the wooden rake in slow, parallel strokes, and the patterns that emerged in the sand were clean and evenly spaced, and she was aware without looking that the chair had moved again. She began a second pattern, overlapping the first at a diagonal. "You can do this one," she said quietly, and held the rake out to the side without turning. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then a small pale hand reached out and took the rake. Senna sat back on her heels and watched the sand table. Lysara moved the rake across the surface in 2 careful strokes, pressing slightly too hard on the first so that the tines dug deeper than they should, and then adjusting on the second so that the line came out true. She did 3 more strokes, stopped, looked at what she had made. "That's good," Senna said. "The diagonal ones are harder because you have to decide where to start, or you will run out of room before you finish the line." Lysara set the rake down on the edge of the tray. She looked at the pattern in the sand. Then she said, in a voice that was very small and slightly unused, like a door that had been shut a long time, "She ran out of room." Senna did not move quickly. She did not exclaim. She let the words arrive and settle the way you let a bird land without rushing toward it. "She did," Senna said. "She did not leave herself enough space on the left." Lysara looked at the pattern for another moment. "Can you fix it?" "We would have to start over." Senna picked up the rake. "That is how you fix sand. You smooth it and try again." She passed the rake to the princess. Lysara took it and smoothed the surface. One long slow stroke that erased everything and left the sand flat and new. Then she began again, more carefully this time, starting from the left. Neither of them heard the door. The Emperor of the Vethali had come without the herald. He stood in the doorway in his plain house robes, the ones he wore when he was not required to be the emperor, just Lysara's father, and he had been there. Senna would later calculate for at least 3 or 4 minutes, long enough to have heard the counselor leave, long enough to have stood in the corridor outside and listened to the specific quality of quiet that was not grief, but was something adjacent to it. The silence that had lived in these rooms for 93 days, and then, long enough to have heard his daughter's voice break through it. She only knew because when she finally looked up from the sand table, his face was wet. She stood immediately. Lysara looked up too, saw her father, and then, without any particular drama, simply because he was there and she had just spoken and the 2 things were now possible at once, she said, "Senna says you start from the left or you run out of room." The Emperor closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the look in them was the kind that Senna did not quite know what to do with, the look of a person who has been given back something they had stopped believing they would get. He crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside his daughter, which was not something emperors typically did, and he picked up the rake she offered him, and the 2 of them worked on the sand table together while Senna gathered her mending kit and began to pack her supplies. "You don't have to go," Lysara said, without looking up from the sand. Senna paused. "I've still got the corridor linens," she said, "but I'll be back tomorrow for the window screens." The Emperor looked at her over his daughter's head. He had the same pale silver eyes as Lysara, and they held the same steadiness. And something else now, something she had no word for but recognized, the way you recognize a weight being set down after a long carry. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was quiet and even, but she could hear what was underneath it. "Senna, sir, Senna Marsh." He was quiet for a moment. "You will not be reassigned from this position." It was not a question, and it was not quite a command. It was the kind of statement that has already arranged itself into fact before it is spoken, the kind that emperors make when something has happened that cannot be undone by policy. "No, sir," she said. "I did not expect to be." He looked at her for another long moment, and she held it without flinching, because she had spent 8 months being invisible, and she had learned that the way you stayed yourself in a palace was to not perform stillness, but to actually have it. "Is there something you need for this work?" he asked. Senna considered the room, the light from the crystal ceiling panels, the sand table, the cushions, the window screens. "A better mending kit," she said. "The one they have issued me has needles that bend." He made a small sound that might have been a laugh and was not quite. "It will be sent tomorrow." She nodded, picked up her supply kit, and went to the door. Lysara was already working on the sand again, guiding the rake in careful diagonal lines from the left, leaving herself space enough to finish. Senna did not look back from the doorway. She had corridor linens to see to, and a window screen in the east gallery that needed the same cloth and the same slow strokes, and she had learned a long time ago, in a winter that felt longer than it was, sitting beside her brother until the world became safe for him again, that the work was the thing, not the watching, not the waiting for recognition. The work itself, done steadily and well, was what filled the room,